Whitney Houston recorded everything, and then the tapes vanished. In her final studio sessions before she died, Whitney confessed secrets about Clive Davis, Bobby Brown, and the music industry that could destroy careers. But 24 hours after her death, armed men raided the studio and took every master tape, and the sound engineer who heard everything was told to forget it ever happened. This video reveals what Whitney said in those recordings, who she named, why the tapes disappeared, and who's been hiding them for over a decade to protect themselves. The studio door burst open at 2 a.m. 4 men in black suits, no badges, no identification, just a legal document that said they had authority to seize everything. The sound engineer stepped back from the mixing board. "You can't just we can, and we are." They disconnected hard drives, pulled master tapes from locked cabinets, took backup drives the engineer had hidden in a floor safe they somehow knew about. 30 minutes later, the studio was empty. Years of Whitney Houston's final recordings gone. The lead man turned to the engineer before leaving. "You heard nothing. You recorded nothing. If anyone asks, these sessions never happened." The door slammed. The engineer stood alone in the empty studio, knowing he'd just witnessed the disappearance of the most dangerous recordings in music history. Whitney Houston walked into Metalworks Studios in Toronto on October 12, 2009. She was supposed to be recording her comeback album. After years of addiction, failed marriages, and canceled tours, this was her return, her resurrection, her proof she still had the voice. But the sessions became something else entirely. Producer Ricky Minor noticed it immediately. Whitney wasn't just singing, she was talking. For hours between takes, she'd sit at the piano and tell stories. She'd finish a vocal, Minor later said in a sealed deposition, then she'd just start talking, about her life, about the industry, about people who'd hurt her. "I thought she was just venting, processing. I didn't realize she was confessing." The sound engineer, whose name was redacted in all legal documents and who spoke only through anonymous interviews, made a decision that would change everything. He kept the tape rolling. Between October 2009 and January 2010, Whitney recorded over 200 hours of studio material. Maybe 40 hours were actual music. The rest was talking, confessing, naming names, telling secrets the industry had buried for decades, and all of it was captured on master tapes that now don't officially exist. The first confession came during a late-night session in November 2009. Whitney had just finished recording a ballad. She was sitting at the piano, alone except for the engineer in the booth. Everyone else had gone home. The engineer's notes from that night later leaked to journalists, described what happened. 3:47 a.m. Whitney, still at piano, asked if I was still recording. I said no. She said good, because I need to say some things off the record. Then she started talking about Clive Davis, the legendary music executive who'd discovered Whitney, who'd made her a star, who'd controlled her career for 25 years. Whitney's voice captured on tape that now doesn't exist. "Clive made me, and Clive owns me. People don't understand that. I don't own my voice. I don't own my songs. I don't even own my name. Clive owns all of it." She talked for 90 minutes that night, about contracts she'd signed at 19 that gave Davis complete control, about money she'd earned that disappeared into management fees and expenses she never approved, about decisions she hadn't been allowed to make about her own career. "I wanted to do R&B. He made me do pop. I wanted to tour small venues. He made me do stadiums. I wanted to rest. He said keep working. Every choice for 25 years his choice, not mine." The engineer kept recording, not because he was trying to expose anything, but because he knew this was historic. The biggest voice in music, finally telling the truth. The second confession was worse. December 2009. Whitney had been drinking between takes, not heavily, but enough to lower her guard completely. She started talking about Bobby Brown. "Everyone thinks Bobby was the problem," she said into the microphone, her voice slurring slightly. "They think he got me on drugs. They think he ruined me. But it wasn't Bobby. Bobby was just there when I fell." She paused. "Clive introduced me to pills. After the second album went huge, he said I needed something to keep me performing, to keep me energized, to get through the tour schedule he'd planned. Uppers before shows, downers after, every night for months." The engineer nearly stopped the recording. This was explosive, career-ending, potentially criminal, but he let it run. "By 1990 I was addicted, needed them to function. Bobby didn't get me on drugs. I was already there. Bobby just did them with me, made me feel less alone." Whitney talked about rehab attempts that Clive had sabotaged because tours were already booked and tickets were sold, about interventions her family tried that her management team blocked, about being trapped in a system that needed her broken enough to be controllable but functional enough to perform. "They wanted me sick," she said. "Healthy Whitney might leave, might fire them, might take control. Sick Whitney needed them, depended on them, did what they said." The recording ran for 2 hours that night, all of it captured, all of it now missing.
January 2010. The sessions were supposed to be wrapping up. Instead, Whitney started talking about specific people, specific incidents, with dates, locations, and details that could be verified. A music executive name redacted in all leaked documents, who she claimed had assaulted her in 1991 after a label party. He cornered me in the bathroom, said if I told anyone, he'd destroy my career. He was powerful enough to do it, so I stayed quiet for 20 years. A producer, also unnamed in leaks, who she claimed had demanded sexual favors in exchange for agreeing to work on her third album. I said no the first time. He went to Clive. Clive told me to do it, said we needed this producer, that the album wouldn't work without him, so I did it, because Clive told me to. A record label executive who she claimed had embezzled money from her touring revenue. Millions. Just gone. When I asked where it went, they showed me paperwork that made no sense. Expenses that never happened. Payments to companies that didn't exist. I fired my accountant for questioning it, because they told me to. Each revelation was documented with enough detail to potentially trigger investigations, lawsuits, criminal charges. The engineer kept recording, and kept backup copies. Because he knew these tapes were important. He didn't know they'd make him a target. The most dangerous recording happened on January 28th. Whitney had been in the studio all night, drinking, crying, talking about her daughter Bobby Christina. They're going to do to her what they did to me, Whitney said. They're already talking about her career, about managing her, about making her a star. She's 16 years old, and they're already planning to own her. She named specific executives who'd approached Bobby about recording contracts, about management deals, about becoming the next Whitney Houston. I told her no, told her to stay away from this industry, but they won't listen to me. They'll go around me, just like they did with my mother when I was young. Then Whitney said something that, according to the engineer, made everything else make sense. If something happens to me, it's not an accident. If I die, if I overdose, if something goes wrong, look at who benefits. Look at who controls my catalog. Look at who's been waiting for me to die so they can profit without me being a problem. The engineer asked what she meant. Whitney looked directly at the studio window, directly at him. This industry eats its artists. We're worth more dead than alive. No drama, no rehab, no canceled tours, just catalogs that print money forever. They're waiting for me to die, and one day, they'll get tired of waiting. The recording ends there. Whitney left the studio, never came back. 25 months later, she was found dead in a bathtub.
February 12, 2012, one day after Whitney's death, the sound engineer arrived at the studio at noon. He planned to start organizing Whitney's recordings, to prepare them for release as tribute material, but someone had beaten him there. The studio had been ransacked, not robbed, ransacked professionally. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Master tapes gone, every single one from Whitney's sessions, hard drives gone, all 3 backup drives that contained digital files, session notes gone, the engineer's detailed logs of what Whitney had said and when, the safe where he'd hidden duplicate masters, opened, empty. They'd known the combination. The only thing left was a business card on the mixing board. No name, just a phone number. The engineer called it. A voice answered, "You don't have those recordings anymore. You never had them. Those sessions never happened. If you claim otherwise, we'll prove you're lying, destroy your career, and pursue legal action for theft of intellectual property." But this conversation never happened either. Forget the number, forget the recordings, forget Whitney said anything. The line went dead. The engineer tried to fight back. He contacted music journalists, told them about the missing tapes, about what Whitney had confessed. Nobody would publish it. Every major music publication declined. Some said it was unverifiable without the actual recordings. Some said it was too legally risky. One editor told him the truth. "We got calls, legal threats, from lawyers representing people you won't name publicly. They made it very clear, publish this story and we'll be sued into bankruptcy. I'm sorry, but we can't." The engineer went to the police, filed a report about the break-in and theft. The case was closed within a week. Insufficient evidence, no sign of forced entry, no proof anything was actually stolen. But the engineer had made copies, secret copies, stored in locations he told no one about. Those copies have never surfaced. Either they don't exist, or the engineer is still too afraid to release them, or he's waiting, for the right moment, for enough time to pass, for the people Whitney named to become vulnerable. 3 theories emerged about who orchestrated the tape seizure and why. Theory 1. Clive Davis and Arista Records. Whitney's contract gave Arista ownership of all recordings made in professional studios. Legally, those tapes belonged to the label, not to Whitney or the engineer. When Whitney died, Clive Davis's team could claim they were simply recovering their property master recordings that would be valuable as posthumous releases. But if the tapes contained Whitney's allegations against Davis himself about drugs, control, financial exploitation, he had every motive to make them disappear. Former label executives speaking anonymously. Clive controlled Whitney's narrative for 25 years. He wasn't going to let some confession tapes destroy his legacy after she died. Those tapes were a threat. They had to go. Clive Davis has never commented on the missing recordings. His representatives have denied the tapes exist or that Davis had any knowledge of them. Theory 2. Whitney's estate and family. After Whitney died, her estate was managed by executors who controlled her catalog and protected her image. The estate might have seized the tapes to prevent damaging revelations from being released, to protect Whitney's legacy, to prevent her confessions from overshadowing her music. Pat Houston, Whitney's sister-in-law and estate executor, may have decided the tapes were too inflammatory, too personal, too damaging to release. Entertainment attorney, estates routinely suppress material that could harm the deceased's reputation. If Whitney said things on tape that made her look bad, made her family look bad, or created legal liability, the estate would absolutely seize and destroy those recordings. But this theory assumes the estate had the capability to organize a sophisticated raid on a Toronto studio within 24 hours of Whitney's death. That level of coordination suggests more than just family protecting legacy. Theory 3. Industry protection. Whitney named names, accused powerful people of assault, exploitation, and financial crimes. Those people, music executives, producers, label heads, had enormous motive to make the tapes disappear before they could be leaked or subpoenaed. A coordinated effort by multiple industry figures using legal threats and financial pressure could explain the comprehensive seizure and the wall of silence that followed. Music journalist who investigated the tapes. I talked to 6 people who claimed to have knowledge of what was on those recordings. Every single one refused to go on record. Every single one said they'd been threatened legally. This wasn't one person protecting themselves. This was an industry protecting itself. If this theory is correct, the tapes weren't taken by one person or entity. They were taken by a coalition of people Whitney had exposed, people who couldn't afford to let her truth become public, and those people are still powerful enough, more than a decade later, to keep those tapes hidden. The sound engineer who recorded Whitney's confessions has lived in hiding since 2012. He gave one interview in 2015 to a British music magazine, under strict anonymity. He's never been publicly identified. His location is unknown. In that interview, he described what it was like to hear Whitney's truth. She was unburdening herself, like she knew time was running out. She'd start singing, then between takes she'd just talk about her whole life, everything that had been done to her, everything she'd been forced to do. Asked what was on the most damaging recordings, he said, names, specific names of executives who assaulted her, dates and locations, details that could be corroborated. She wasn't vague. She was building a case, like she was creating evidence. Asked why he thought Whitney did it, he said, insurance. I think she knew she was in danger, knew the people she was exposing might retaliate, so she was creating a record, proof that she'd told the truth before anything happened to her. Asked if he believed Whitney's death was connected to the tapes, he said, 25 months after she made those recordings, she's dead. 24 hours after she dies, armed men raid my studio and take everything, you tell me. The engineer claimed he still has copies, hidden, protected. I made backups, multiple backups, stored in places no one knows about. If something happens to me, they go public automatically. That's the only reason I'm still alive. Asked if he'd ever release them, he said, when the people she named are dead or powerless, when they can't retaliate, when justice matters more than my safety, until then they stay hidden. Music journalists have tried for years to locate this engineer, to verify his claims, to obtain the supposed backup recordings. None have succeeded. Either he's protecting himself too well, or he's exaggerating what he has, or the people he's hiding from found him and silenced him. But occasionally fragments surface, snippets that claim to be from Whitney's sessions, audio that can't be authenticated but sounds legitimate, a 30-second clip uploaded to YouTube in 2017, quickly deleted, of Whitney's voice saying, "They're going to kill me eventually. I know too much, I've seen too much, I'm a liability." A recording that surfaced on a conspiracy forum in 2019, allegedly Whitney describing a specific assault by a named executive in graphic detail. None of these can be verified, all could be faked, but they keep the legend alive, the legend that somewhere, hidden, protected, Whitney's truth still exists. If the tapes exist, if they contain what the engineer claims, if they're ever released, what would they prove? According to people who claim to have heard portions, the recordings would document sexual abuse by multiple music industry executives across 3 decades, Whitney naming specific men, describing specific incidents, providing verifiable details that could trigger criminal investigations even years later, financial exploitation and embezzlement. Whitney detailing how millions disappeared from her earnings through fake expenses and fraudulent contracts, with enough specifics to trace money and potentially recover stolen funds for her estate. Forced drug use as a control mechanism. Whitney describing how management encouraged her addiction to keep her dependent and compliant. potentially criminal behavior by the people responsible for her welfare, threats and intimidation to silence her. Whitney documenting specific instances where she was told what would happen if she spoke publicly about industry abuse, predictions of her own death. Whitney explicitly stating she believed she would be killed to prevent her from exposing powerful people. If authentic, these recordings would be the most significant document of music industry corruption and abuse ever created. They would trigger investigations, lawsuits, criminal charges, career destructions. They would prove that Whitney Houston wasn't just a tragic victim of addiction. She was a target, a threat, someone who knew too much and was eliminated. But there's a problem with all of this. Without the actual tapes, it's all speculation, rumor, conspiracy theory. The people Whitney supposedly accused can deny everything, can claim the tapes never existed, can say it's all lies invented by people trying to profit from her death, and they have been saying exactly that for over a decade. Clive Davis's representatives. There are no such recordings. This is a fantasy created by people who want to damage Mr. Davis's reputation. Representatives for other named individuals. Our clients were never accused of anything by Ms. Houston. These alleged tapes are fabricated. Record label statements. Whitney Houston's legacy deserves to be honored, not exploited by people spreading false rumors about non-existent recordings. Without the tapes, the truth can't be proven, and the people who have the tapes aren't releasing them, which means Whitney's truth remains hidden, protected, controlled by the same industry that controlled her life. Whitney's missing tapes aren't unique. Artists have been confessing industry secrets for decades, and those confessions have been disappearing just as long. Michael Jackson kept detailed diaries about music industry corruption and abuse. After his death, those diaries were seized by his estate and have never been fully released. Prince recorded hours of interviews discussing industry exploitation and artist rights. Those recordings vanished after his death and haven't surfaced. Amy Winehouse reportedly recorded confessional material about her label's role in enabling her addiction. Those sessions were lost when her studio was cleaned out after she died. The pattern is clear. Artists confess, artists die, confessions disappear. Someone is systematically suppressing the truth, making sure that when artists try to expose the industry, their evidence vanishes before it can do damage. A music industry attorney speaking anonymously explained how it works. When an artist dies, the first thing that happens is evidence control. Lawyers secure everything, recordings, writings, videos, anything that could create legal liability. They claim it's to protect the estate, but really they're protecting the industry. The same thing happened to Whitney's personal journals. Friends say Whitney kept handwritten journals for years, writing about her life, her career, her relationships, and the people who controlled her. After her death, those journals disappeared. Family members who asked about them were told they'd been lost or destroyed for privacy reasons. But one journal entry allegedly survived, leaked to media in 2014, never authenticated but compelling. The entry, dated November 2009, the same month as her confessional studio sessions, reportedly said, "I'm creating evidence, recording everything, writing everything. Because when they come for me, I want proof. I want people to know it wasn't an accident. I want them to know I tried to tell the truth. I want the tapes to survive even if I don't." If real, this entry suggests Whitney knew exactly what she was doing, knew she was in danger, knew she might die, and knew that creating recordings was her only chance at posthumous justice. But the tapes are gone, the journals are gone, the evidence is gone, and Whitney can't tell us where to find it. More than a decade after Whitney's death, the tapes remain missing. The sound engineer remains hidden, the people Whitney named remain powerful, and anyone who tries to find the truth faces the same wall of silence. Journalists who've investigated have been threatened with lawsuits, offered money to stop digging, had sources suddenly refuse to talk. One investigative reporter, who spent 3 years trying to locate the tapes, described what happened. "I'd get close to someone who claimed knowledge, set up an interview, then they'd cancel, then they'd stop returning calls, then their lawyers would contact me saying their client never had any information, and I should stop harassing them. The few people willing to speak do so anonymously, and say the same thing. The tapes exist, but you'll never get them. Too many powerful people have too much to lose, and so Whitney Houston's truth remains locked away, hidden by the same industry that exploited her, controlled her, and possibly killed her. The tapes that could prove what really happened to her, that could expose decades of industry abuse, that could give her death meaning and purpose. Those tapes are out there somewhere, in a vault, in a safe, in the hands of someone who knows releasing them would destroy careers and lives, and that person is choosing silence over truth. Whitney Houston has been dead for over a decade, but her voice still terrifies the people she named on those tapes. Because if those recordings ever surface, they'll prove what everyone has suspected, that Whitney Houston wasn't destroyed by addiction, or bad choices, or tragic circumstances. She was destroyed by an industry that profits from breaking its artists, an industry that turns young singers into products, exploits them until they break, then profits from their deaths, an industry that has spent 12 years making sure Whitney's truth stays buried.
but truth has a way of surviving. Fragments leak, witnesses talk, evidence resurfaces, and somewhere, hidden, protected, Whitney Houston's voice is still speaking, still waiting for the moment when someone is brave enough to let the world hear it. The tapes exist, the people who have them know what's on them, and they're terrified of what will happen if Whitney's voice is finally heard. Because dead artists can't fight back, but their recordings can. And Whitney Houston recorded everything,